Okay, welcome to this week's lab. This week we are going to install DHCP server on our server 2019 GUI. But before we do that, we actually have to create a workstation that we can connect to the DHCP server so that we can actually verify that the DHCP server is working. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here and we're going to create a new virtual machine. So we're going to click on the white space over on the left-hand side in that panel where it shows our different servers, and we'll create our new virtual machine. We're going to go ahead and click on Custom and click Next. Stick with the workstation version that you're using, workstation 16, 17, whatever. Again, if you're using a Mac computer, probably shouldn't, but you would use Fusion if you're using Mac. Click Next. We're going to install from a disk image. We don't want the server ISO. What we want is the client ISO. So you should have it in your CNT 211 file. I don't, which is not a big deal because I have it in a different one here. So I will choose this Windows 10 ISO. Click Next. We're going to name this Windows 10 client so that we aren't confused. Again, we want to change our location to be our external hard drive. So we're going to click on our external hard drive, CNT 211, virtual machines, and we're going to create a new folder inside virtual machines called Windows 10 client. We'll choose that as the folder, validate that that is where we're saving our virtual machine, click Next. Again, we're using BIOS, not UEFI. Number of processors can stay as whatever it is. For this, we're going to actually want probably around 4 gigs, just so that we know that it's going to be running at a decent speed. Again, if you don't have the 32 gigs recommended for this course, you're gonna be running into issues. But you know, keep pushing away. Leave it at the 2 gigs. That's fine. It's going to be slower, but whatever. Click Next. Then we're going to go to our network type. You can see that we have a couple different versions. We're going to go ahead and leave this as network address translated for now. Click Next. Leave this as normal. Leave this as normal. We are going to create a new virtual disk. Click Next. And we can leave this at the 60 gigs. It doesn't need to be anything bigger than that right now. Click Next. We're going to browse to where this is that we want it, and we're going to go into our CNT 211, into our virtual machines, Windows 10 client, and we're going to create a new folder called virtual disks inside there, and that's where the hard drive for this machine is going to stay. Some of you guys might be asking, why do we do this? The reason's pretty simple. We want to make sure that we have individual files for each virtual machine, and inside of each virtual machine, just like you would a standard machine, you want to have a hard drive, and that's where the virtual disk is being stored, as that hard drive. So click Next and click Finish. Okay, now that our virtual machine is created, we just have to go through the steps of creating our actual operating system. We can leave everything as English, click Next. We're going to click Install Now. We don't have a product key, so we're going to click on I don't have a product key. And we just want to do Windows 10 Pro. Make sure that you use Windows 10 Pro because Windows 10 Home does not allow you to join a domain, which is something that we'll do later on. So Windows 10 Pro is where we want to be. accept the license because why not? We're doing a custom install, and we can leave this as the allocated 60 gigs, not a big deal. Click next and let the installation begin. And this will probably take a little while, so we'll skip through till the next spot. Okay, we can stick with the region of the United States because that's where we're at. Stick with the US keyboard layout. We can skip past the second layout. Okay, now that it's rebooted a little bit, it's going to ask us if we're setting up for personal use or for an organization. Again, we are setting up for an organization, which is why we used Pro. So we want to click on that and click next. If you accidentally click on personal use, it'll actually bring you to this same screen, which will ask you for an email address, and we don't want that. So what it doesn't show with personal use is this join domain instead. So we're going to click on domain join instead. And we're just going to type in administrator and click next. It doesn't like that because an administrator account already exists. So we're just going to type in our name. So for me, it's Dr. Kidd. For you, whatever your name is, and click next. Create that CNT password. Click next. Confirm it. Click next. And come up with some security questions because why not? Doesn't matter what they are. Doesn't matter what their answer is as long as the answer is different. Next, we're going to turn off all of these things that Microsoft wants to do to spy on you because we don't need them on. Hit accept. And we're going to skip this. And we're going to say not now for Cortana. Okay, now we have ourselves a Windows 10 client. Now, I already have my server running. If you don't, you should go ahead and power it on. And we're just going to test connectivity between the server and the client. Before we do that, we just want to check the settings on the server and make sure that the network adapter is set to NAT just like the client should be. Yes. So we're going to click on the server and go to our command prompt. And we're going to right click on this and we're going to run this as administrator. As you noticed from our last lab, best practice to run from administrator mode. That way, if we type in a command, we don't have to worry about logging out and logging back in. So you should get used to running your command prompt as administrator. And then once that pops up, we will do an IP config so that we can see what our server's IP address is. Okay, our IP address is 192.168.174.130. Yours might be different, but this is my IP address. So I need to make sure that I write that down somewhere because I'm going to want to ping it from the client. So we're going to come over here to our client computer and we are going to run command prompt from this computer. Again, right-clicking on it, making sure we run as administrator. And we do an IP config. And you can see that our IP address is 192.168.174.131. So our server is 130 and our client is 131. So we just want to go ahead and ping 192.168.174.131. Oh, my numlock was not on. Always got to make sure you got that numlock on. Oh, 131. So we're pinging ourselves first just to make sure everything's working on our server or on our client. It should be, but you know, why not try it? And now we'll ping the server to make sure that we're able to ping it. So as of right now, I'm able to ping myself and I'm able to ping my server. Now, what I want to do is I want to go into each one of these virtual machines and we're going to change our settings so that it's not network address translated, but so that it's on a private network. So we want to do host only. And we're going to hit OK. And we're going to do this to our server as well. Change it to host only, hit OK. Now we're going to run that IP config again. And it might take a minute because we changed our network adapter, but that's okay. Okay, notice that our IP address is still 192.168.174.130. Now, I wonder why that is. Maybe you can answer that in the questions. Because when we go to our client, we now have a different IP address, 192.168.80.128. So let's see if we can figure out why that is. And you're going to find out here in a second, but you know, that's the unfortunate part of doing these videos. So hopefully you didn't cheat, you actually answered the question properly. So we're going to go ahead on our server and we're going to right click on our network adapter, go to Open Internet and Network Settings, which again might take a little while. Notice how slow this is, even with my computer with the 32 gigs of RAM. The reason that it's so slow, honestly, is because we're using this external hard drive. If we stored all of our files on the actual server itself or on the host computer itself, instead of on an external drive, this would run much, much faster. The reason that we're doing it on an external drive is because I don't know what kind of computers you guys have at home, and I don't want to fill your computer with virtual machine files. So if you do have plenty of space on your home computer and you don't want to use the external drive, then don't. Make a folder on your desktop or on your root C drive or whatever and store all these files on there as opposed to on an external drive. It'll make things much, much faster. Anyways, we'll click on Change Adapter Options. And we'll right click on our network adapter, go to Properties. And the reason that this IP address is still set to what it's set to is because we did that by creating a static IP address, because all servers should have a static IP address. So we're going to change our static IP address now. Going back to the Windows 10 client, we can see it's 192.168.80.128. That's the subnet that we're in. So we're just going to change this to 80 instead of 174. Change it on all three of our settings here from 80 to 170, or from 174 to 80. And actually, we're going to change our IP address here to 10 for the host, because we want to make sure that we just stay to conventional methods of saying that servers are the double-digit machines. Hit OK, hit close. It's going to make a bunch of changes. And when it's done, we should be able to run that IP config again and see that our static IP address is now changed to the 80 like we wanted it to. So this one was 80.128. This one is 80.10. We should be able to ping from our Windows client 192.168.80.10. And we can. So even though we changed over to a host-only network, we're still able to ping our server because we're on the same network. So now that we have our client is able to ping our server, let's just make sure that our server is able to ping our client. So we want to ping 192.168.80.128, I believe is what it was. Yep. Hit enter. And request timed out. Now, you're probably asking yourself why this is happening, and that is a good question. Why don't you go ahead and find out? And again, you're going to find out here in a second because we're going to change it to make it work. But nevertheless, try and answer the question on your own. Okay, so let's go ahead and on our Windows client, we haven't done any configuration, so we need to turn off our firewall. So we're going to type in firewall, go to Windows Defender Firewall, turn on off firewall, and we're just going to turn it off. It's going to tell us that we're naughty for turning off our firewall, and we're okay with that. Live dangerously. Now when we ping from the server to the client, we are able to get our ping across. So we have fully functioning communication between our server and our client, and this is really good. Now we can actually go through the process of installing DHCP onto our server. So we're going to open up Server Manager. All of the installation of services, roles, features is done through the Server Manager. So make sure that when you want to add something, that you open up the Server Manager on your server. You can open Server Manager from a Windows client and it will actually let you install a role, but you don't want to do that. So make sure that you're on your Windows server instead of your Windows client when you're doing this. So once Server Manager opens up, go ahead and click on Manage. Again, this is going to take a little while because of our configuration here. I think after this video, I'm going to put all my files onto my server so that I don't have to worry about how slow this is communicating with the USB drive. Click on Manage, and we're going to click Add Roles and Features. And you can, if you want to, click on this little checkbox to skip this default page. It's just kind of a notification of the wizard. I don't usually click on it because why not? But so we're going to click Next on this. This is a role-based feature, so we're going to click Next. This is going on the server 2019, which is what we're on right now. And you can check the IP address to make sure that it's the correct server. Click Next. And what we're installing is DHCP server. When we click on that, you'll see that it says that it has to add features as well. So we'll say OK to that. Make sure the check mark for DHCP server is there and click Next. We don't need to do any other features, so we can click Next on that and click Next again. And then we can install. And this process might take a couple of minutes. So as soon as this is done with the install process, we will move on to the next point. Okay, now that this has downloaded, it shows us right here that we need to complete DHCP configuration. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And we're going to go ahead and just click Commit and hit Close. I don't know why it does that. It didn't used to do that in previous versions of Windows Server. They just started doing this complete configuration thing. I think it's kind of dumb myself, but whatever. Go ahead and hit Close. And now inside Server Manager, you can see that not only do we have the file and storage services that we had before, but now we have DHCP. Unfortunately, that does not mean that we're done. So we're going to go ahead and minimize this, and we're going to go to our Windows icon, and we're going to type in DHCP, and we're going to open that up. The thing about DHCP server is that just because you have it installed doesn't mean it's actually going to function. You have to do things like create a scope in order for it to work. So we're going to click on our server 2019. We're going to click on IPv4, and we're going to right click on it and click New Scope. The New Scope wizard will pop up, and we'll click Next. And we're just going to name this our scope. If you're in a production environment, you might have multiple scopes that have multiple purposes. For instance, Washtenaw Community College has a scope specifically for wirelessly connected devices and a scope for hardwired devices. So they have, descriptions and names that are appropriate for those. But this is just us doing a test of DHCP, so we're just going to call it our scope. Click Next. And our starting IP range, we're actually going to start at 192.168.80.1, and we're going to end at 192.168.80.254. So the reason that we don't do 255 is because 255 is broadcast. And the reason that we are adding one, even though we probably shouldn't because that should be our default gateway, is because we're going to do exclusions and reservations later, so we can have that scope. So we'll click Next. This is where it wants us to add exclusions. We're not going to add any exclusions here right now. We're going to do this later. So we'll click Next. This is our lease duration. The lease duration is how long an individual computer has an IP address for. Your videos will explain that, and so will your lecture quite a bit more. We're not going to change this. We'll leave it as default. So we'll click Next. And it asks if we want to configure any of the other options. We'll go ahead and say yes. It wants to know what our default gateway is. So we can type in 192.168.80.2 and click Add. It wants to know what our DNS server is. We don't have that information right now, so we're just going to go ahead and click Next. It wants to know what our WINS server is. Nobody uses WINS. Nobody has NetBIOS enabled anymore. It's not something that's utilized, so we're just going to skip past that. And then it asks if we want to activate the scope. Now, DHCP server will not produce DHCP addresses for client computers unless the scope is active. So you have to activate the scope in order for that to work. However, If you are on the campus network, make sure that you're not plugged into the campus network right now. So if you're on campus, which most of you shouldn't be, this should be only for online students, but if you're on campus doing this, make sure that you're disconnected from the campus network, because you will start producing DHCP addresses at this point. And if other people are trying to get DHCP addresses, they're going to get them from your server, and it's going to make it so that they don't have internet. So don't do that. Don't allow the campus network to see your network. But if you are at home or online doing this, go ahead and activate your scope and click Finish. And now we have our DHCP server configured here, producing a DHCP scope. So we should be able to click on our Windows client and perform an IP config space release and an IP config space renew. And notice that we got the same IP address. Now, there's a reason behind that, but let's make sure that we know what that is. So go ahead and answer why we got the same IP address. But if you note up here, when we did our first IP config, we didn't have a default gateway. Now down here, we do. That proves, that default gateway right there proves that our server did produce the IP address for this computer. It did renew through the DHCP server on this server. However, we can also validate that our client is connected as well. We can click on our scope and we can look at the address leases. And we can see, if we maximize this, that it has produced an address lease for this desktop N4L4LDG. So if we go back to our Windows client and we do a hostname command, that is the hostname for this client. So we know that the server is communicating with the client and giving it an IPv4 address. Pretty neat, huh? So now that we have our DHCP server and our client is getting a DHCP address from our DHCP server, what else can we do? Well, like I said before, we can set up reservations. And a reservation is simply an IP address that is, go figure, reserved for an individual computer. So we can name the reservation whatever we want. Let's call it client 1. And we can assign whatever IP address we want. So let's go ahead and do 192.168.80.100. Okay. And then we just need to put the client's MAC address in. Now we can get that through this IP config. If we do an IP config space /all, it will actually show us the physical address for our client right here. So our physical address for this device is, or for my device, is 00-0C-29-8E-F5-C9. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in here. 00-0, whoops, what's going on here? Dash 0C dash 298E 29-8E F5C9 dash F5 dash C9. And if we wanted to, we could put in a description of that client. No big deal. Whatever you want to put in for a description. Supported types, we'll just leave it as both and hit add. And notice that when we add it, it gets rid of all the information. It does this so that you can add multiple reservations at a time instead of having to go through and right click, add new reservation, go through it, hit add, do it again, do it again, do it again. So it allows you to do multiple at a time, but we're just going to hit close, and you can see that now we have this reservation. So if we do an IP config on our client again, oh, we still have an IP address of 192.168.80.128. Why is that? The reason that we still have that IP address is because we haven't released it. We created the reservation after already obtaining an IP address, so we have to actually release the IP address in order to get the one that we want. So we do the IP config /release and the IP config space /renew. Oops. Renew. And we still have the 128 address. So there's something wrong with our reservation. What we'll actually need to do is we're going to have to reconcile the scope. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and reconcile. It tells us the database is correct. And then we will also refresh our scope, just so that we know what's going on. And again, we'll do the IP config release and the IP config renew. And hopefully we should have our 128 address, or our 100 address, and we don't. Notice though that we don't have our default gateway either. So we're actually getting an IP address from a different DHCP source than our server, and that's not good. So we want to make sure that there's no other DHCP happening between our client and our server, that we still have the 128 address. However, we don't have our default gateway. This is telling us that we're getting our DHCP address from somewhere other than our server. So what we want to do is we want to stop that from happening. Now to do this, we can come up here to Windows, to our window here and hit Edit and click on Virtual Network Editor. Once the Virtual Network Editor comes up, you'll see that we have our host-only virtual network that we're utilizing, and that it has DHCP enabled. So we're going to click on our DHCP settings. Sorry, we're going to click on Change Settings first and go ahead and say yes if the little window pops up. And we're going to click on our DHCP settings here, and we're going to disconnect our DHCP. Sorry, we're going to unclick our box here for Use Local DHCP Service because we're already setting one up. Click on Apply. And that should stop us from getting a DHCP address from the server, from virtual machine. And now we should only be getting our IP addresses from the server. So we can do the renew and release, or sorry, release and renew on our client again. And we should after a little while, get a IP address from the server. There we go. And you can see that now we do actually utilize our 192.168.80.100 reservation. So no matter what we do at this point, as far as a release or renew, we will always get that 100 reservation unless we get rid of it. So that teaches you a little bit about your virtual machines VMware Workstation and DHCP server as far as creating a reservation. Okay, what else do we want to do in this lab? We've created our scope. We've activated our scope. We've created a reservation. We can also create an exclusion. If we right click on our address pool and we click on new exclusion range, we can actually exclude a set of IP addresses starting at 192.168.80.1 and ending at 192.168.80.99. Click add and close. Now you can see that we cannot give out an IP address between 1 and 99. The reason that we're doing this is so that servers, which would have our double-digit numbers, and intermediary devices like our router and our switches, which would have our single-digit numbers, can't have their IP addresses used up in our scope. Now, you might be asking yourself, why didn't we just start at 100 with the scope? And that's a really good question. Why didn't we? You can do that and never have to worry about scopes. Or sorry, never have to worry about exclusions. You can also go all the way up to, 110 and never have to worry about reservations. The idea is that DHCP can do reservations and can do exclusions, but you can also just set up your scope how you want to so that the IPs that you're giving out are only IPs that you want to give out. So either way, it works, but we've done it both ways, or we've done it the way that DHCP would have you do it, and it's working just fine. So other than that, there's not a whole lot of other options that we need to worry about right now. We don't have a DNS server, so we don't have to set that up. We've created our reservations and our exclusions. And we've created our default gateway. We can also do something called DHCP filtering. But we'll do that in our next lab. We won't do that right now. So that is pretty much it. We can go ahead and close out of this. And we can close out of this. And we are done with our lab. Make sure that you answer the questions in the lab. Make sure you provide screenshots of your DHCP service running with the client connected to it. And make sure you fill out your trouble ticket. And of course, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button for the video because it really does help. Okay, have a great day and enjoy the rest of your evening.